Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Chinacchio, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including those annuals. But Dan, the annuals don't count. Like that annual that came out last week, that doesn't count. Like, what was that thing?
I don't really know, and I'm going to ignore it so I can continue making my point. But moving on, thank you for joining us for the 5th episode of Season 5 of the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics, as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. This is the perfect time to start listening.
In this season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk, we're going back to the mid-'80s when comics were changing, embracing new visual styles, aging up with their audience, and ditching formulas that had defined serialized superheroes for decades. One of the components that had long dominated Spider-Man comics was a strict adherence to facing Spidey off against rogues invented by Ditko and Lee.
However, Roger Stern had other ideas and chose to specifically avoid featuring Spidey's rogues gallery. Instead, his Spider-Man stories pitted Spidey against the villains of his heroic peers. That's right. Today, on the Amazing Spider Talk, we are talking about the bad guys. More specifically, we will be talking about other people's bad guys. Dan, can I do it once and then be done with it? You know what I want to do.
Get it out of your system, Mark, and we'll move on.
Other people's bad guys. You know, this is the bad guys, and these are other people's bad guys. All right, I'm done. I'm sorry. It's terrible, and I'm embarrassing us in front of some people. So why don't you tell us about it, Dan?
Yeah, that's right, because we couldn't do this alone. Other people's bad guys demands, well, other people. So we brought on the co-hosts of Screw It. We're going to talk about comics, the podcast. Brothers Kevin and Will Hines, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Dan. Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thank you, Dan and Mark. Yeah, we're here to talk about other people's bad guys.
Yeah.
In normal voices or otherwise.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it to Mark's weird voices for now.
Okay, all right.
I think the show can only handle so much of that.
Let me know.
So tell us about Screw It. We're going to talk about comics, your podcast.
Sure. It's a thinly veiled excuse for Will and I to talk once a week. We're brothers who live on opposite sides of the country, and we'll go weeks and weeks and weeks without talking sometimes. So we started doing this podcast to talk about a thing we really love, which was the comics we grew up reading. We started with Spider-Man. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the character. We did the original Ditko Lee run first, and we went like issue by issue, did a few other odds and ends, and then sort of spun off into other titles.
Aren't you doing a Spider-Man related title right now?
We have now returned to Spider-Man. We're doing Superior Spider-Man, which is how you guys started, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
But we're covering that. Will had never read it before. It's probably the thing we get emailed the most to cover. I read it when it came out, but this is my first time rereading it. It's a blast.
Yeah, I really love it. Kevin and I started reading comics as kids, like together at the same time, basically. And then Kevin had I basically think never stopped. I mean, he's ebbed and flowed in intensity, but basically has read comics every week since the early 80s. I had long stretches where I wouldn't. And so our podcast is partly Kevin kind of catching me up on stuff that I missed, or at least we're moving into that phase. And including this, Superior Spider-Man. I had heard people rave about it. I ignored those raves. I refused to read it. And the second I started, I was like, oof, this is good.
What's been the highlight of that journey and the low light of that journey of getting caught up on the past 20, 30 years of comics?
I still have a long way to go. I should actually say that along the way, Kevin would occasionally recommend something or an arc, and I would kind of keep my toe in the pool that way. And other friends of mine who are comic book fans, like they'd be like, oh, Tom King's, Vision is like really interesting. You should read that. And I would read that, not having had read any, of those like around that time or something like that. Highlight, I'm going to say, I think it's Superior Spider-Man. Like it's blowing me away. Like I can't believe how good it is. And really everything by Dan Slott that Kevin has made me read, including issue 800 and 801, has been really incredible. Low Light. Sometimes I'll pick up, this is just an old man being stuck in his ways, but sometimes the new comics seem to me to be so busy and hyperactive with this is just a matter of taste, with sort of like some generation derivative of Todd McFarlane, limbs going everywhere, things spilling out over the panels. And I kind of prefer a more minimalist kind of Mazzucchelli style. Maybe Darwin Cook kind of did something like that. So I guess the low light is when I pick up something and I feel old because it's so visually busy.
That's totally fair. So, on this season, we've been talking about the Roger Stern run of Amazing Spider-Man. I know, Kevin, you're doing like a big reread of these. Do you guys want to talk to us about your history with this particular run of comics?
Yeah, I am doing a reread. Well, a read and reread, because I'd read some of them and some of them I hadn't read. So I kind of went back to whenever he started in Spectacular, and basically I'm reading Spectacular and Amazing from that point on until I get bored with it, I guess is the plan. But I'm not keeping a good pace. I'll read like 3 issues one week and then nothing for 3 weeks as I'm reading stuff for our podcast or just trying to keep up with current stuff. And I'm digging it. I'm loving it. I loved John Romita Jr.'s old art style. I like his current art style too, but I find his old art style like a perfect modernization of Seniors. Like it feels cool and interesting. It's got a little Ditko creepiness to it, but it's kind of clean like John Romita Seniors. And so that's probably my favorite part of it. Roger Stern's writing is great, but I get very excited about John Romita Jr.'s original art.
I'll throw this out to all 3 of you guys. What is it that makes Roger, and you probably already said it, so I'm asking you to be a little redundant. What is it that makes Roger Stern's writing so good? Because he was writing Amazing when Kevin and I first started reading, like as kids. Like he was the current writer, right, Kevin?
Yeah, he was just finished. Like we started right around Secret Wars time, probably. So he was just leaving.
Yeah, and then we would buy some back issues because we were getting enthusiastic. So Stern, I associate Stern with our very early days of reading Marvel Comics very fondly. Now when I read issues now and then, I still enjoy it, but it does seem it's like watching old movies. Like there is an aspect where it's kind of dated. The pace is a little bit slower. They don't smooth over the logic bumps as well as I think they do now. But anyway, I don't know. What is it that makes Roger Stern stand out? Why do we rave about him? Help me out.
I mean,
Kevin? Anybody.
Let's Mark go first.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump on you.
No.
I mean, for me, frankly, I go back and I read Stern, and I mean, for me, it is going back. I mean, like my first experience with New Spider-Man was the early Michelini run. So I mean, like it predates me by a couple of writers. So when I go back and read Stern, to me, it's kind of like the perfect marriage of like the Stan Lee salesmanship and kind of like the schlockiness of Stan with like a more for the time modern sensibility in terms of how comics should read. Like when you look at Stern and his contemporaries like Byrne and Frank Miller and those, which is who he came up with, so it would make sense that they kind of like mirror each other in terms of style and tone of storytelling. So I feel like Stern got the sound of Spider-Man from Lee, but he crafted his stories to kind of mesh with his contemporaries at the time, and I mean that happens to be like my favorite time of Marvel period. I mean, I whether it's Byrne's Fantastic Four or Miller's Daredevil, I mean, like all those comics coming out in
it's definitely one of our favorite
80s,
eras too.
It's just like to me that's the pinnacle of Marvel. And I feel like Stern gets it with like the Spider-Man verve that he borrowed, I think, heavily from Stan. So that's for me why he works so well on this book.
I feel like his Peter Parker alongside like JMS's Peter Parker is the most alive as a character of any of the writers. I really get a sense of like the emotional ebb and flow of Peter throughout these stories, even as he's dividing his time between his like personal life and his time as Spider-Man. And I feel like, Mark talked about Stan Lee's kind of hokiness. I think that's still there, but it's dialed down a little bit, and it really only pierces through when it's appropriate in the context. So he doesn't feel like a Bugs Bunny or something that's just kind of shooting off jokes a minute. It's like the jokes come at an exact piercing moment. I think someone like Bendis would kind of take that and elevate it even further as a writer that really knows how to work with dialogue. But this has that classical sensibility that you're describing, but like Mark said, is just more modern enough that it fits like right in the middle of today's kind of like whip fast comics and yesteryear's kind of 9-panel grids. And to me, it's like the perfect sweet spot. And it could be just nostalgia, but it just hits for me perfectly. Kevin, what do you think about it?
I also think the dialing back is a good point, because I think, like, especially when you compare it to like Denny O'Neil that preceded Roger Stern, but even like some of the guys before that, the soap opera elements were so over the top sometimes. Like everybody, and there's still some of this with Roger Stern and Bill Mantlo who's going on at the same time. Characters fall in love in one panel and they hate each other in one. Like emotions just go from 0 to 100 so quickly that it's tough to buy. Like for some reason, I didn't bother me during the Stan Lee Steve Ditko books, because it's old enough that Ditko's art is so cool and it's such a new raw character that's still finding its feet, that none of that bothers me. But it quickly bothers me even during the Stan Lee Romita era. So in this era, you don't get that. It feels just a little more natural and a little more real in the sense of it's still a superhero comic book with all the trappings. But I buy the relationships and his friendships and his problems all more like, I don't know, sometimes you read these problems he was having the Denny O'Neil run, and it's like, this doesn't seem like a real problem. It just seems like you are anguishing because you're supposed to. And here with Roger Stern, it's like when he's having those issues or having anguish or angst, it feels like it's earned. And when he's having fun, it feels earned. And I don't know, it just, there's a little bit more nuance when Roger Stern does it.
Thank you.
Well, that's actually, it's a great conversation to be having, but it actually is an interesting bridge to today's topic, which is that this run is so dominated by Spider-Man fighting other people's villains that, when we think about like the Stan Lee run, which largely I think inspired, Roger Stern's work, it was really dominated by a dozen or so villains that reoccurred and have been reoccurring ever since. And here, I think every time I go back, Stern's run exists in my mind in such a fond place. And every time I return to it, I'm just kind of overwhelmed by just how little we experience Spider-Man's rogues gallery. So Mark, tell us a little bit more about this kind of like decision that Stern made in regards to doing this, and any of your thoughts about it.
Sure. Well, I mean, you can go back and check any Stern interview where this topic comes up, and I mean, he's pretty blunt about it in terms of why he went in this direction. I mean, basically, when he got his shot on the book, he was like, look, we've told stories with Doc Ock, we told stories with Electro and Sandman. I don't want to tell those stories anymore. I want to go another direction. The one exception to that rule was Vulture, because like Stern, and we talked about this, I think, in our very first episode of the season. Roger Stern loved the Vulture, who's, of course, one of the original rogues. But the Vulture didn't really have much of a backstory when Spider-Man first fought him, and Stern gave him an origin story, which was kind of a very new thing at the time. But when it came to other villains, it was like, why don't we just put Spider-Man in Spider-Man situations but use other villains? I mean, like there are plenty of other villains that are, as powerful or maybe more powerful than Doc Ock, like the Juggernaut. Like, why don't we put him in a situation where he has to overcome the odds with the Juggernaut instead of Doc Ock? Or, instead of having another Green Goblin Osborn family, why don't we introduce a new Goblin character, being the Hobgoblin? So that was kind of Stern's general thesis behind this whole thing, was that he wanted to tell unique stories, and he felt that for his run, he could put Spider-Man in familiar situations with new characters and have it create like a whole new kind of storytelling. which we'll talk about in with some of these instances here. I think generally worked. I mean, I think some worked better than others, just because some of the villains he did use were kind of like, okay. I mean, but then there are others where it's like, like take someone like the stilt-man in that story, which the stilt-man is a punchline of a character, and yet like it comes down to a real like, this is only a situation that happens to Spider-Man kind of scenario. And that's, I think, because of, as we were talking about earlier, Stern understood the character in a way that I think few other writers who had preceded him, at least immediately preceded him, got him. So Stern was able to take these other characters and just bridge into these situations where it felt familiar but also exciting and new, because they were just completely different characters interacting with our hero for the first time.
Will and Kevin, how do you guys feel about like when comics do this? When you read a issue of Daredevil and he's fighting the Lizard or something like that. Is that something that excites you if you see that on the comic book shelf, or are you like, that's probably just a throwaway issue, not to be bothered with?
I kind of dig it. I think in general. I mean, like what Mark said, it depends on the villains. If it's a cool villain, it's fun. I mean, there's something weird about the fact that like when the Vulture shows up, it's always Spider-Man that fights him, right? It's like there's a lot of superheroes in New York, and they've got dibs on their villains, and it's sort of silly about that. But these characters are also created with them in mind. So like the Vulture was created to fight Spider-Man, so like he fits his power set in a way. But I don't know. I think it could be really fun. I mean, the Juggernaut is a classic for many reasons, but one of them I think is just because it was such an odd pairing of Juggernaut versus Spider-Man, so that one works. And I remember briefly when Carl Kessel was and Kerry Nord were doing Daredevil, and they had Daredevil fight, I think it was Mr. Hyde. It was during, I think that was also during Heroes Reborn, so like the Avengers weren't around and the Fantastic Four weren't around, so Daredevil was like, I gotta fight this guy. Thor's not around to fight this guy. And it's very fun to see like Daredevil fight a guy that's way out of his strength class, just way out of his strength class. And I remember that issue stood out to me in a really fun way. Not that I think of that character as a Daredevil villain now, but it was a fun issue in that. When you bring in lamer villains, I don't know quite what the point is. When Stilt-Man shows up in everybody's comics, I mean, even in this run, I don't understand Stilt-Man. I don't understand the affection towards him. It's like I don't get excited about seeing Stilt-Man on the cover, I guess, of any comic, including Daredevil, where he started.
And I'm down with it. I like anything that shakes up the formula. Like I think that comics get too set in their ways, and I like it when we, whatever has been done a million times, give me something different. Whether it's a different interpretation of that villain, maybe a new backstory that we haven't heard before. Yeah, pairing up with a different villain, or maybe somebody new that we haven't heard of before. Like I love the original Marvel comics, but I do think sometimes they get stuck in the 60s a little bit, and it's always refreshing when what's been a better addition to the Spider-Man universe than Venom, like in recent years. Like he's as much a part of the classic. What's that?
Recent
like
years,
since the 80s. For me, for me, recent is 1980 through 1990. Nothing happened after.
Many of us would wish that to be true, I think.
I also think this era is interesting because it's pre-Secret Wars. It's like a lot of crossovers. So like there's still, when I read these comics, I always forget that these superheroes haven't all met each other. Spider-Man more than others because of Team Up, I guess. But like characters meet villains for the first time ever, and I don't know, like now if you read a comic in 2021 and Miss Marvel's meeting a character, she's like, oh, I know about you. You fought the event. Like she knows everything about the characters that she's fighting. And that's part of her character, I guess. But there's something less fun about someone who's like meeting Kraven for the first time, perhaps. It's like, oh, you don't know anything about this guy. You don't know what you're in for or what his weaknesses are or what his strengths are. There's something really fun about that. And you get that a lot in this pre-Secret Wars time.
And sometimes you get a new rogue for that character, like Spider-Man, like Stegoron, or any of these other characters that started off with someone else, but then fit in better, or Swarm, for example.
I would say Swarm and the Champions.
or Jack-O-Lantern, I think, who came from Machine Man, but being a Ditko creation fits, I think, right in with Spider-Man. He feels like he should have started there.
Yeah.
Well, right. That's funny because, like, they end up becoming Spider-Man rogues, and people forget that they started somewhere else. So there's always that opportunity.
You guys do a lot of discussion of Machine Man in this podcast. You guys bringing up Machine Man a lot. My brother likes to bring up Machine Man.
I mean, hey, it's Kirby and Ditko are the two artists on that run, Will. It should be all you think about.
I love it.
When are we going to get Screw It? We're just going to talk about Machine Man. Or is that already happening?
It's
Any
a tough
dates.
read. It's a tough read.
It's in development. We're already also doing Screw It. We're just going to talk about war games, which is unrelated to comics, but we keep bringing up that movie. So,
Hey, I guess maybe more related to present day than you realize. Drone technology and
yeah, that's
various
right.
things.
Hey, you'll be on our podcast when we launch it. You can come
Great.
on and
I'm very
tell
excited.
us how war games is still relevant.
Yeah, I will bring that very hot take. So let's get into talking, because I think we're all here for the grand, fun show of it all, which is to go through some of these other people's bad guys. We had an episode in the past called The Forgettable Guys, which is just like villains we never want to return to. Some of these guys I think would fall easily into that category.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the first one is a great example of that.
Oh,
so
man.
See, I'm gonna push back on this immediately because
What?
Okay, all right, all right.
You're going to defend the fool killer?
Okay, that's the thing. Okay, you look on the surface, it's the fool killer, and his whole thing is like, "You're a fool, I'm gonna kill you." Right? That's
correct.
And it's terrible, right? Like that sounds terrible. But this comic specifically, I think this is a well done comic. I maybe I am completely deluded by my Roger Stern standum here, but the fact of the matter is, I feel like because they, again, it's, to me, this is why Stern was so good on Spider-Man, because he took this character. So the Fool Killer actually first appeared as primarily a Defender's villain. His first appearance was in Omega the Unknown. So I mean, where's the Omega the Unknown podcast? We got to get on that.
Coming up.
Somewhere in the unknown.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's what's that? Englehart or Gerber? I get confused. Who was doing Omega in the 70s?
Probably Gerber. It was a weird one, so that seems more.
But so the Fool Killer in this instance is Greg Salinger, and it's someone that Peter knows. It's from his circle. It's at Empire State University, and that to me is what kind of elevates the story to making sense in the world of Spider-Man. That's to me, that's a key element of Spider-Man roguedom, is that personal connection to Peter somehow, and how he is in part at fault for this character, for this villain's creation, and for the harm that he does. And I think that comes across here in this issue, because you have, Greg is, he's a student, he's annoyed with the administration and at the school because he's not getting, what is it basically that he just can't.
His student loans.
Yeah, thank you. It was he can't register for a class or loans or something like that, and then he hears hears Peter call these people fools, and that's kind of the trigger, it's the Kill Bill for him, and he goes on this killing spree. But it's to me again this, it's goofy, and the Fool Killer is a ridiculous character, and he's got no real backstory here. But in this case, it works because it's that personal connection to Peter, it's that personal connection to Spider-Man.
Man,
and he feels the responsibility for it. I know. Go tell me how wrong I am.
I'm going to tell you how wrong you are. You are brave. You are brave. This is the toughest side of any debate to take, to defend the Fool Killer. The personal connection is nice. I agree with that. Sure. And there is a fun to it. He's so outrageous that it is kind of silly and fun, sort of like a Batman TV show kind of villain. But I guess my argument against the Fool Killer are these things. He wants to kill fools. And by his definition, a fool is anybody who is called a fool by anyone for any reason. There's no argument needed or context. As soon as somebody's called a fool, he's ready to murder them. That's my first argument against that. Two, his sort of slightly half-baked defense of his position is that he wants people to be more poetic. And the main fault of fools is they don't have poetry. But his name is the least poetic name of any villain. There is no poetry in it. You know, I mean, it would be like if Vulture was called like Birdwing Arm Man or something like that. You know, or Bird Jewelry Robber, if that was Vulture's name. And
he's
he
a
says,
Salinger. He's Salinger, so like I mean, you know, maybe he has like kids, Franny and Zoe or something. I mean, you know,
think he's
who are
related
also
to J.D.
killers.
Salinger. And then finally, he says "fool" in every sentence. He says "fool" more than like the Batman's Riddler says "riddle." You know what I mean? Like it's a lot.
If he said "fool" like 30 less times, maybe I could be won over by Mark's argument. He says "fool" so it gets so annoying to read that word so many times. It drives me up. Imagine if Punisher, every time he shot someone, was just like, "You've been punished." The character would not be popular.
Or if right before he pulled the trigger, Punisher leaned over to whoever's with him. You know what I'm going to do to this guy? It's like, you're going to punish him? You got it.
Time to punish.
I want to be on this guy's side because nobody wants to take up arms against college administrations more than me. I really want
Fool Killer is like the ultimate Bernie bro. Like he wants to clear student debt at any cost.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of that. But then, like, I look at his costume and I'm just like, this cannot be my champion.
It's
like,
swashbuckling. What's wrong with a swashbuckler, Dan?
What is the connection here? You know, like
It's like Wildcat meets Batman meets Errol Flynn, I guess, as they look.
Meets Captain Crunch. I don't know. It's a lot. So
that purple sash on his hat is bold, though. I'll give that. That's very Prince. That's very of his era.
But to go back, I'm going to yield to a degree, but like to go back to my original point, like, yes, this is all true. What you're saying is all true. But given how he's used in the context of a Spider-Man comic, don't you think he's well used in terms of how the things are tied together? I mean, putting
what are you
aside
saying? He ties together because he's both a villain and he is in Peter's graduate program? That's the big move?
I'm just saying that if you're going to bring in somebody from outside the usual realm of rogues, like you want them to have, you know, like with Spider-Man, like it's always, to me, what makes Spider-Man so unique is like, it seems like all of his villains have they're either mirror reflections of him in some way in terms of, you know, whether they are literal mirror reflections, like, you know, Venom, the new villain, or
brand new, fresh out of the box,
right? Or even like, you know, even if you go to someone like Electro or Sandman, who are characters who are like kind of given powers and then they immediately choose, how do I use these powers irresponsibly versus responsibly? And I feel like when you can like tie the villain to Spider-Man in some way, in a meaningful way, like right out of the bat, that's to me, that's good Spider-Man comic book writing.
But would Fool Killer be better if he was anyone else? Like if you just like subbed in another villain and you still like, you know, somebody who goes to school with Peter, it'd be a better story.
I mean,
I think a fair barometer is if you subbed in, and we could do this for all the villains we're talking about today. If you subbed in Paste Pot Pete, is it better or worse? And if it's Paste Pot Pete makes it better, then the villain is bad. So if Paste Pot Pete is studying in Pete's graduate program,
but that's the thing, he's not. That we
but
know
I mean,
that he's not.
We could just say that he is, right?
I mean, when did he enroll? I mean, like we already know how bad the admissions process is at Empire State University. So, you know, obviously, you know, he wouldn't be getting through financial aid or anything, right? So where would Paste Pot Pete be going from here? I mean, obviously, Greg Salinger is there.
Is Kurt Connors that was the Lizard? Did he work at Empire State University? I know he taught at Peter's University in the movies, but was he at Empire State University in the comics also?
Correct. Yes, he is.
Hey, then I got to say, Empire State University recruits some top level talent. They got a guy who turned himself into a lizard. They gave a scholarship to a guy who invented web fluid. They got an eye for science talent, you know? So if they admitted Paste Pot Pete, I think they'd be right.
I mean, like Spider-Man's got an adhesive and so does Paste Pot Pete.
Yeah, he could be getting his PhD in sticky stuff, and there'd be nobody better to study under than Peter Parker.
Well, I'm gonna put
Ace by Pete is like 50. He's like an
I'm
old
going to put
man.
the final note on the full killer, which is, Mark, I like the idea of a college classmate of Peter's being a villain. Not that that's a trope we've never returned to again, because it turns out every one of Peter's friends is a villain or connected to a villain in some way.
Right.
But, the kind of like this new character, this new friend who triggers his spider sense for some reason, interesting. But the minute I see him don a pirate costume, it loses me. I just think about like Seinfeld. I don't want to be a pirate. That's not the avenue that this villain should have gone. I think it's one of Stern's only misses in terms of like who the villain actually is.
Okay.
That's just my feeling on it.
I now understand why we have guests, because finally, Dan, after 8 years of repression, we could all just gang up on Mark and his fool killer defending. No, I get it, and like I said at the beginning, it's a totally ridiculous character. I just feel like this could have been a complete train wreck, and to me, this comic is completely readable in a way that maybe some other comics are not readable involving Spider-Man. So
I think you've been reading too many modern Spider-Man comics, Mark.
I would put this up against a lot of current Spider-Man. That's all I'm saying.
I think that's fair. All right, so let's move on to something, Mark, that I think your defense of it will not get as much pushback. At least I hope not, which is the Juggernaut from Amazing Spider-Man 229 to 230. It's the famous Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. We all know the Juggernaut. He's an X-Men villain, first debuting in X-Men number 12. And, we're going to do a whole episode on this story in the future. But so I won't go too deep into it. I mean, Will and Kevin, Mark and I have been very kind of like forthright. This is one of our favorite Spider-Man stories.
We're right with you. We covered this in our podcast. We took a break from our Ditko issues to cover this as one of the all-time great non-Ditko Spider-Man stories. Total standout, a complete thrill, still holds up, really exciting. It's an amazing two-part story. Kevin, am I right on this?
Well, it just feels like if Fool Killer was the one rampaging through the city, there'd be more of a connection with Peter,
I shall walk through any building that houses a fool.
No, it's the Juggernaut story is great. It's near perfect. It's so fun to read. It's beautiful. It is exciting. It stands out. It's also like, I don't know how many Juggernaut stories there had really been at this time. So he's still such a new character. I don't know. And he's not quite Hulk strong, but it is like the next best thing to having like Spider-Man have to try to stop the Hulk. It's the Juggernaut. It's so cool, so out of his league, and it's such a fun story. And the best superhero stories are always don't give up for all the characters, right? We always love to see the character who you should give up and you just don't. That's why you win. And this is a great example of that.
Here's my question about it, though. What if the Juggernaut was the Rhino? If we're talking about other people's villains, if you sub in the Rhino, does this elevate the character of the Rhino in a way that he probably long needed at this time? Like, what do we think? Would it lose something by being the Rhino? Is there an unknown element that makes the Juggernaut special within the pages of this?
I do think there is some fun in the story that Spider-Man doesn't know what he's up against.
Yeah.
Like he is throwing everything at this guy going, this should stop him. And it doesn't. And he's like, oh my goodness, it doesn't. And it would lose a little bit something if it was just like, oh, the Rhino's stronger than he used to be. If that's all, like if the Rhino just got like a power upgrade, I do think like the Rhino should be stronger in a sense. I mean, I'm crazy in the sense that there's a part of me that would love if Spider-Man was in a self-contained universe where Rhino was one of the strongest people in the world. But he's not. He's not close to it. So I think it wouldn't be quite as fun if it was like, oh, it's this guy again, this dummy again.
Yeah, I think Juggernaut elevates it. That's a great question. Rhino would be pretty close. But the main thing Juggernaut has over Rhino is emotional temperament. Like Rhino is an out-of-control rampager, right? He's like an angry, bull in a china shop. And Juggernaut is more just like, Juggernaut's very angry. But he's that slow and steady, wins the race kind of, just like so powerful that he's not even nervous about it.
Yeah,
so
he
like
doesn't
the
pay
Rhino would
Spider-Man
have
any
to
mind, right?
Yeah, like so the Rhino's personality wouldn't quite have the same dynamic, I don't think. Like Juggernaut is walking through buildings because he can't be bothered to walk around them. It's not out of like anger of being trapped in a suit. So Juggernaut's a better fit emotionally, even if the Rhino's powers could affect a lot of the same situations. That's what I think.
Yeah, there's something very fun about this story that for like almost the entire first issue, he doesn't even care that Spider-Man's trying to stop him.
Yeah.
Then also the second issue is the real payoff. Like you guys will get into this when you go over it in more detail, but this reminds me of
Wait,
some of the
second issue. There's a second issue.
Isn't there two?
I gotta read it.
Oh yeah, the stories you're missing a lot. I feel like there was a couple times when Ditko would have a whole issue of setup, and then the next issue would be all fighting, like paying off. And this kind of reminds me of that. I mean, the Juggernaut is beginning to walk through things in the first issue, but the second issue is where Spidey really doubles down and says, I'm going to stop him no matter what, right?
Well, it's also he's lost, right? In the first issue, Spider-Man loses. The Madam Web has been pulled out of her machines and is near death, and he could just let the Juggernaut leave now. The Juggernaut is no longer a threat, and Spider-Man won't let him go.
Yeah.
Love it.
I mean, for me, I mean, just going back to your question, Dan, I mean, like, it's also worth noting that, like, Juggernaut as a villain has always been associated with fighting the X-Men, which is a team. And I think, like, even like in the text itself, Spider-Man is like, oh man, the X-Men are out of town, the Avengers can't be found right now, it's just up to me. And I think, like, you know, you can't say that with the Rhino, or you can't say that with, I mean, heck, you can't even really say that with the Hulk with Spider-Man, because Spider-Man has had those experiences already one-on-one with these characters, whereas with the Juggernaut, he's never had to deal with a character like this one-on-one, especially a character that has really only fought teams before, like, you know. So to me, like, that's what elevates it. It's like, you know, that's what pushes us to this next level of, like, the don't give up, the don't quit, because it's like, you know, not only is Spider-Man like punching above his weight here, it's like he's just by himself, where you know rather than having any kind of backup whatsoever. So that's you know, I mean, we all know what I think about this story. I mean, I got put on the spot by Tom Brevoort, and I said, nothing can stop the Juggernaut's my favorite. So I have to now be like married to that opinion for the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that.
I will say the whole, like, him fighting it as one dude and not a team is almost immediately undercut at the end of this run when Spider-Man defeats the X-Men single-handedly in the Secret Wars crossover.
Well, we didn't know that then.
Yeah, right. You know, I did want to mention there are, you know, several other times where Spider-Man has fought X-Men villains, but it's very, like, sparingly. He actually probably fights the X-Men more than he fights their villains. But I can think of a few, like there's the 327 where he fights Magneto, and I believe he fights Magneto again in like the late 90s. I'm not sure the particular issue. There's like Spider-Man against the Tri-Sentinel, which I guess is kind of X-Men related. You know, he's fought him a few times.
He fought
Sabretooth
too.
Yeah, Sabretooth against I think it's a Peter David Spectacular issue from around this era too. Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of bring those up. So, okay, Juggernaut, we're all on board. We all love that story and think he's a good fight. And I think you guys made good points for why it should have been the Juggernaut. The next
all right,
story...
so let me just put the board up there, Dan. If we're ranking other people's bad guys, it's Juggernaut, followed closely behind by Fool Killer right now, right?
I guess now,
if they're the only two, then yes, he's closely behind.
All right, fair.
Just mere fractions of a point separating them. All right, let's
Mark,
keep going.
I want you to be married to that opinion for the rest of the time, because I think you're not going to live. Some might call you a fool and then proclaim you to be killed.
I want you to become a big Fool Killer cosplayer. I want you to go full on cosplay for the Fool Killer.
I don't know if I have the pirate garb, but we'll make this happen.
That's going to have to be a Patreon goal if I ever heard one.
No.
You know, Mark still owes some of our Patreons a dance video, so you know, we'll hold you to that, Mark.
Yes.
Okay, so next up we've got Amazing Spider-Man 231 and 232, and these villains, I think, not only in this story are a team, but kind of throughout a lot of their appearances. That's Cobra and Mr. Hyde. Boy, you know, it's like spaghetti and meatballs. Mark, tell us a little bit about these two characters, Cobra and Mr. Hyde.
Cobra, he's more of a, I guess you would consider him like Thor, Captain America villain. His first appearance was in Journey into Mystery number 98, so that would put him in the Thor sector. His whole his shtick is basically like he can slither around. I mean, how would you describe his powers, Dan? I mean, it's kind of a little weird, right?
I think that's fair. It's one of those characters I would love to see in like live action in motion because I just can't imagine it.
That guy is slippery.
Yeah, like slide, yeah. My favorite thing about him is that like he got his powers because he was jealous of a professor who was doing research on a universal antitoxin to snake venom. So in order to get revenge on this guy who he was jealous of, he decided that he would allow a cobra to bite both himself and the professor and then use the antitoxin to save himself. But little did he know that the snake that bit him was irradiated at the time. And so the unique combination of that radioactivity and this antitoxin gave him cobra powers, science. And that's how he got there. This is like the spider bite, but like several steps removed. And I don't know how far I need to go to like buy into, just give him powers. It doesn't need to be this complicated.
It's a weird pairing, Cobra and Hyde. The fact that they are commonly paired together seems like they just randomly drew each other in like a three-legged race competition or something. Like, I don't understand why they're friends or why they work together. I do think Cobra is interesting visually. His power, I can't believe he's a Thor villain. He seems like Thor would destroy him.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. He makes sense with Captain America the few times they faced off. I could see that kind of the way that Batroc was used in Winter Soldier. Like, in a future movie. I mean, I know we're not going to see Steve Rogers, but like kind of Cobra just being used as like opening film fodder for Captain America. Like I could see that, and that could be pretty cool visually from a cinematic.
I mean, he's
standpoint.
a good villain for Spider-Man. Spider-Man sticks to things, and Cobra slips around. I mean, that's like the irresistible force and the immovable object. Like,
yes.
Cobra's also like a planner, right? He's like a smart guy, heist. He's the evil villain with the blueprint out on the desk and like all the steps calculated, as opposed to Mr. Hyde, who is like rampaging anger. That's
it. Just shouldn't it be like Cobra and Boa Constrictor or Jekyll and Hyde? Like the pairing is a snake and a classic horror novel. It doesn't. It's so random.
Here comes Mr. Clocks and the Wolfman.
Yeah.
My guess is it's literally because Mr. Hyde appeared in the issue after him in Journey into Mystery 99. And so because they were like right next to each other and teamed up in that issue, they've been like forever linked. Although
they like met in a rap party.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I think in this case, it's interesting because they explicitly hate each other in this story. And so you're seeing this weird relationship start to fracture in some way. Although my favorite character in these stories is the Nose Norton, which just like is like an inch away from becoming anti-Semitic. Like you can just feel that it's like there in the page somewhere.
Can we talk about Mr. Hyde a little bit, or
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, to me, okay. I mean, like he's no fool killer, but like to me, this is like no. I mean, in all seriousness, like I have a soft spot for Mr. Hyde. I think I mean, first of all, anyone that has been portrayed by Kyle MacLachlan in any way is got to be, if I don't know, am I the only one who watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. the season that he did Calvin Zabo?
I didn't see it. I did not see it.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah. So yeah, from Twin Peaks fame.
You mean Kyle MacLachlan?
Is it MacLachlan? I thought it was McCallaghan. I'm sorry.
Do you mean the star of Twin Peaks?
MacLachlan.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Edit it out, Rick.
Please continue, Mark.
Anyone who's portrayed by Kyle MacLachlan. Thank you. Sorry, Dan. From Twin Peaks fame. I'm done. No, it's got to be good, right? No, but I think Mr. Hyde's a pretty cool villain, and of course, like if you were reading other Stern stuff that he was doing at this time, Hyde featured prominently in the Under Siege storyline, which to me is like probably peak Avengers, at least for that era. Yeah. Certainly, and like to me, like it wasn't the threat level quite of Juggernaut, although I'm okay. So this was right after Juggernaut. I'm like, I always confuse
there's even a little bit where they tease that the Juggernaut has gotten free because they show Hyde in shadows. Yeah. And it's like they like do a weird thing where they like cut to the concrete, and then later on they cut to like this shadowy giant figure storming off, and it's like, did the Juggernaut get out?
Yeah, no, it's this guy. It's just another guy who could beat the living crap out of Spider-Man. But that's the thing. I like Spider-Man going up against these like behemoth, super strong, above his pay weight villains, and I think Hyde is a good one. I mean, I actually feel like the presence of Cobra, even though like they're kind of, it's in that typical Spider-Man fashion, he's trying to protect the Cobra from Hyde killing him, but at the same token, Cobra's no good either, so he can't, Spider-Man can't win for losing, but I like the threat that Hyde presents in these issues. I like that as a Spider-Man villain.
I also kind of like Hyde. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because the way he dresses. Like, 'cause he's just another strong guy. There's no shortage of his ilk. But he's been in a lot of fun stories. I mentioned that Daredevil story I enjoyed. He was fun in Jeff Parker's Thunderbolts run. He's had like a couple of stretches where it's just like this guy shows up and he was great in Under Siege, like Mark said. It's like Hyde, I don't know. He's been in a lot of good stories. At a certain point, he gets some credit for that.
Somebody should make a short story based on him. Did Kirby design the original look? He looks like a Kirby guy to me, but he also looks like a 1970s guy to me. Just like he's got 1970s hair. He's got the big oversized jacket. I can picture him in a turtleneck and some chains. To me, he's a real 1970s style strongman.
He's Journey into Mystery 99. That sounds like Kirby.
Yeah, that would be Kirby.
He looks like he looks like a big old Kirby brute, like almost like a New Gods style Kirby. But he's got a cool look. I don't know. Sometimes that's enough to make somebody compelling in comics. A great costume or whatever.
I do think sometimes I get tired of Spider-Man just fighting guys who are strong like that. There was a stretch where he's just fighting a bunch of strong guys. Yeah. So maybe the addition of Cobra does help in that sense. Even though the pairing makes no sense to me and never will, it gives like a twist or an angle to the story that it wouldn't otherwise have. It'd just be another strong dude. But yeah, I kind of dug this two-parter. I kind of liked Cobra, even though I don't quite get his powers any more than Dan did. I like Hyde. I don't know. This maybe is my Fool Killer soft spot. I liked this pairing.
There's a number of elements I like about these books. I think the cover for 232 is really great, with Hyde just kind of bursting out of his Jekyll persona. I think that's really cool looking. And then there's a certain element of comedy around Cobra where Spider-Man uses him as like a projectile to throw at Hyde and get stuck to Hyde. And then at the end where like Cobra tries to get away and really he just wants to get away from Hyde. So he surrenders himself to the police and he's like, please take me in. Like, I got to get away from this guy. And I always love that element of how the story ends.
There's a great drawing in page 18 of the second issue of this, the bottom right corner, where Spidey has sprained his ankle and he's facing off against Hyde. And he's like, man, I got to finish this guy off quick. And then there's just like a profile 3/4 shot of Hyde's head screaming, big wide open mouth, and the words, "I'll kill you," not in a speech balloon, just the words, almost like a sound effect, are coming out of Hyde's mouth. It looks like a record cover or something. It's kind of fun.
That is cool. All right, so let's update our rankings here. I think Juggernaut still sits at the top. Yep. Do we place Cobra and Hyde as a team above Fool Killer? I think we all know where how Mark feels, which is Fool Killer still a close second.
No, I mean, I was actually going to say I would do Juggernaut, Hyde, Fool Killer, Cobra.
can't
All right,
split up Hyde and
I'll
Cobra. You can't
allow
split 'em up.
it. Will and Kevin, where do you guys sit?
I put them both above Fool Killer.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do the boring, sensible ranking. Juggernaut first, Cobra, Hyde second, Fool Killer.
Nose Norton third.
I'm going to take this rare opportunity to disagree with Mark and side with you guys again. Mark, this is a rough day for you.
Okay. Well, I got a few more villains ahead of me where I can make this up. Okay, I'm feeling confident.
How dare you slight our friend Cobra like this? All right. Well, in the meantime, let's take a break and talk about the Slack.
Yeah, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
I'm there all the time, probably too often. And just this week, we've been discussing all of our theories about Spider-Man Beyond and the end of the Spencer run. It's pretty hot in conversation there. People talking about Black Widow. It's just an exciting place to hang out. I know, Kevin, you hang out in the Slack all the time. How's your experience been there?
I do. I enjoy it. It's the only place where I can claim that Kindred is actually secretly the coffee bean, and people will know what I'm talking about. So that when you can make a reference like that to some people, that's a fun place to be.
I don't even know what that means right now.
I don't know either. The coffee shop has become a supervillain.
That's
That's about as plausible as any other theory. So we'll take it. So yeah, if you guys want to join this awesome Spider-Man community with me and Kevin and Mark, if I can ever twist his arm long enough,
I go on like every 3 months.
All right, that's fair. So just follow the link in the description and be sure to say hi. And we'd love to know what you guys thought about this episode. I'm sure Kevin would love to have the plaudits, from appearing on the show. I
need it. I'm having a rough week, so come on, give me some praise.
Yeah, good. I like to hear that. And come in there and trash the Fool Killer with us. I think we'd all like to hear that because it's a mark-free zone for the most part, so you won't get much pushback.
Oh, that's what a fool believes, Dan. Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, this is really terrifying for me. Okay, so let's get back to the main part of the show.
All right. Well, this next character, there's going to be fisticuffs here if we get too much fighting about this story, right, Dan? Come on. We were texting about this earlier, Dan, and you were like, "Oh yeah, that's great." So I don't want to hear a different story now that we're all on the air here, and that is Amazing Spider-Man 237, which involved the Stilt-man, of course, of Daredevil fame. He first appeared in Daredevil number 8. Generally, the Stilt-man has been depicted in the Marvel Universe as a complete joke and a loser. Kind of like the proto Boomerang, right, Dan? I mean, like this is the original lame villain. What I like about this story is, again, this is kind of like Spider-Man and his lame luck coming home to roost here, where the basically Stilt-man picks a fight here because he's on a losing streak, which he's always on, but he feels he reminisces about a time where he feels he defeated Spider-Man, and he's like, I'm gonna pick a fight with Spider-Man because that's how I'm gonna get my winning streak back. And over the course of battle, Spider-Man actually has to sacrifice himself from it's kind of like a sonic blast of sorts to save the Stilt-man. And Stilt-man's kind of like looking at the prone Spider-Man body, and it's like, do I finish him off? And he's like, no, I can't. But he still wants to take the credit of the victory anyway. And to me, like, that's like quintessential Spider-Man there. It's Spider-Man who is just doing the right thing, even though if the shoe was on the other foot, the character, of course, would not do the same for him. And the fact that it's like a character as lowly as Stilt-man, to me, elevates it further in terms of the absurdity, yet the kind of familiarity of only this could happen to Spider-Man. So have at it. Tell me why Stilt-man sucks and why we shouldn't be talking about a Stilt-man story in any kind of reverential way here.
Mark, I think you're right on the money.
Yay!
I love this issue. I like Stilt-man is a joke, but I'm endeared to him because he's a joke in the universe. I kind of root for him. I like that he stubbornly will only use stilts as his power. He won't like adapt his technology to something else, like I don't know, anything else, like some kind of maybe just a propellant system that can launch him in the air and make him do big leaps. No, it's big stilts. He sticks to his guns. And I also agree the ending of the story where Spidey, does an act of mercy and that moves Stilt-man into also acting good. That is quintessential great power, great responsibility right there. So I think Roger Stern found a way to make Stilt-man a good metaphor for for a prime Spidey emotional tone. I think this is the second best villain we've had so far. Kevin?
I
Dan?
think that is insane. His power is that he is tall. Right? He's got long legs. I like the ending. I like the idea that Spider-Man sacrifices himself so Stilt-man doesn't kill Spider-Man. Like Stilt-man, who was all ready to kill Spider-Man, doesn't do it. That's a nice moment in a story that is half recap of the Stilt-man exploits that I never cared to know. And this story recaps all of them. So many adventures that Stilt-man has, and then it powers him up. To
recaps or sells you on it.
That part for sure did not happen. Then it powers him up, which I don't like when characters are depowered. So I'm all for Stilt-man getting powered up, but I guess his power up is that his armor is a little better. I don't quite understand why he's more powerful. This version of Stilt-man, he's just tall. That's it. Spider-Man fighting guys who fly. That's like Stilt-man without legs.
Dan, I gotta jump in here. Kevin, you don't get it. It's not just that he's tall. It's you said what your favorite thing about heroes is when they don't give up. Stilt-man doesn't give up. Stilt-man comes back with the stilts. He gets defeated. He's back with the stilts. He gets knocked down. He gets up again. He is Chumbawamba. He is he could stop the Juggernaut. He would just keep getting bigger and bigger stilts until he was finally able to knock Juggernaut into a pile of goo, and he would win.
I'd rather watch Spider-Man deal with Cobra slithering down chimneys 100 times over before I watch Stilt-man step over Spider-Man, I guess would be what he would do. I don't know. It's not for me.
Stilt-man versus Galactus. That's my pitch.
I don't know why he's not like Crutch Man. Like, just take the stilts off your legs and put them on your arms, and you've got this punching force from a distance. Like, I feel like that's an easy swap to make your powers a million times more useful.
That would make him more like Machine Man.
I guess
it out. We're just going to talk about Machine Man.
I really like this story too. I do agree that the story itself is a little too heavy on the recappy and a little low on the Stilt-man-y, present action. But I think Boomerang is probably the perfect comparison, because I think this story kind of does almost the entire arc that we've gotten with Boomerang in the past decade in kind of like a single issue. I like the shift in protagonist. Really, Stilt-man is kind of the main character here. He's the one that kind of has the transformation. And I think it's kind of a good prototype for so many of these stories that we would see, in the future. I'm even thinking in the Batman universe, where we got the war of jokes and riddles, and where it was about Kite Man, being the real hero of that story. I like any story like this, and I think this is kind of the prototypical version of that in the Spider-Man mythos. Is it a perfect story? No, but I think the ending is really sold and really works. And it's just it's enough. I don't need a whole ton of Stilt-man-y content. He's a pushover, maybe literally. And so I'm willing to go with it for the nice little moral tale told at the end there. I like this story.
Can't believe I'm alone in thinking Stilt-man is not a good villain.
Final pitch for you, Kevin. How about the splash page? Stilt-man and his civvies, all thin and emaciated, looking like the ultimate underdog, casting aside the newspaper, angry. That's a great splash. That's a splash page of resentment. That's the opening of a kitchen sink play from the 1950s. That's a drama of an American. This is Death of a Salesman.
Death of a Stilt-man.
Yeah.
What if
Map the story onto the enforcers, and I love it. But take away the power of stilts, and I'm more interested in this character a million times over.
what if
To call back to our podcast where I'm constantly pitching the Enforcers as a TV show.
I mean, I genuinely love the enforcers. I genuinely don't get Stilt-man.
what if the comic started with like a stilt like stomping down under a pirate's hat? And you just know that
Stilt-man had taken down Fool
There
Killer.
lies the Fool Killer. Sorry.
That might.
Put Fool Killer on some stilts, and now maybe he's got it. A little something.
These fools and their shorts.
I see them all from up top.
Yeah.
All right, so let's update our rankings. So I can't believe we're doing this. Will, you said this is number 2 for you.
Number 2, Juggernaut, Stilt-man,
Oh my
Cobra,
goodness.
and Hyde, and then Fool Killer.
Kevin, you this is your moment. Like, where do you put Stilt-man in comparison to Fool Killer?
Juggernaut, Hyde, Cobra, the Stilt-man, Fool Killer.
All right, Mark, how about you?
I'm with Will. I'm putting Stilt-man for this story number 2, and then Hyde. Fool Killer Cobra.
Fool Killer Cobra. All right, and I'm echoing Will on this. I've got Juggernaut, Stilt-man,
my
Hyde, Cobra, Fool Killer.
If I was Hyde, I would track you guys down.
I will kill you.
If you were Cobra, you'd be sliding all over us.
He'd be under your couch right now, Will. You wouldn't even notice. He could slip right under there.
All right, so next up we've got Mad Thinker and his battle droid. This is Amazing Spider-Man 252. The Mad Thinker appearing in Fantastic Four number 15 for the first time. He's primarily a Fantastic Four villain, though I will say this isn't his first battle with Spider-Man. And my favorite thing about the Mad Thinker is that, like, nobody really knows who this guy is or where he comes from. It's just the kind of pretentious background someone declaring themselves the Mad Thinker would have. You know, like, oh, I'm all mystery and I'm thoughtful. Like, great, dude.
Yeah. No, yeah, I don't even know where to start with this one. Dan, why don't you walk us through more Mad Thinker?
Yeah, so Mad Thinker, he is like a perfect, like, you know, thinker, if you will. He can game out every scenario and get ahead of everybody, and he's just so smart that he doesn't have any special power. He can just, I don't know, he's like Rube Goldberg, man. You know, he knows exactly how this complicated series of implausible things are going to play out, just through the calculations in his mind. And so in this installment, he has installed a cybernetic link in his brain that's allowed him to, from jail, project his mind into the mechanical constructs of an android, in this case, his battle droid. And he decides, well, I've heard about Spider-Man, and this guy seems to have like a sixth sense. I'm going to test it out with this battle droid so that I can work that into my future plans. And, you know, it's kind of complicated, the events that transpire. Spider-Man ultimately confuses the android, sending it into generators that destroy it, and then it blows up spectacularly. And my favorite part of this is that the Mad Thinker has now confirmed Spider-Sense, and he promptly never uses that information again. Like, we never hear from this guy again. He's been sitting on this information for 50 years, or whatever, 40 years. It's the end of the Mad Thinker. What do you guys think about the Mad Thinker and his battle droid?
I want to like the Mad Thinker because I do love that era of FF villains. I love the Wizard. I love the Wingless Wizard and his anti-gravity discs. But
Are you a
Mad
big
Thinker's-
Puppet Master fan?
I do. I like the Puppet Master. He's creepy.
Yeah.
But the Mad Thinker seems like his main power is just timing, right? Like he's the guy who's like, the FF are going to show up in 38 seconds, and
Yes.
there's a 97% chance that Spider-Man will swing by this building at this time. I'm like, that's such a weird way to show intellect.
A lot of Kirby and Lee villains, as Kevin and I noticed when we did our 101 issues of Lee Kirby FF, a lot of Lee Kirby villains establish their dominance by precision timing.
Yeah.
They just own a stopwatch. And but I do like the idea of because in the FF stories he would lose because he would figure out the odds of everything and know he's going to win, but then he would always not take some factor. He's like, oh, I didn't think the mailman would show up. Like there's an X factor, which seems like then you're not that good a planner. But that fits better with Spider-Man to me. Like Spider-Man is a sort of character who defies prediction. Like he's going to beat you in a way that he never did that before. Well, how could I ever know he would do that? It fits Spider-Man's character better. So I think the Mad Thinker is a better fit for Spider-Man than for the FF. But the timing of his timing skills, it's like it's the stilts of watches. I don't know. It doesn't do much for me.
You see, I feel completely the opposite with Mad Thinker. I feel like he works in the realm of Fantastic Four because I mean you have a character like Reed Richards who's so about like logic and reason and following through his thesis. Whereas I think the Thinker can work as a reasonable counter to that, which was, as you pointed out with Spider-Man, it's the opposite. It's he's unpredictable. So how can the Thinker actively plan against Spider-Man? Why would he even want to bother to screw in that universe, so to speak? So
I see that as like he would be like it would aggravate him and drive him crazy. Like he would want to understand Spider-Man. He's like, I'm so smart. There's got to be a way to know what Spider-Man's going to do, and he'd become obsessed with Spider-Man. I'm now reading into a story that is not necessarily told in this issue. I think he's a good fit in that sense. Like, I don't know. Just like a less smart Reed Richards is going to lose to Reed Richards.
I think Dan mentioned the big flaw with the Mad Thinkers is we don't know what this guy's story is. Like, what makes Marvel characters work is that they're more than their powers and their costume. They have some emotional context or temperament that makes them, human and relatable. Tony Stark is more interesting than Iron Man. Peter Parker is more interesting than Spider-Man. That's the secret of the Marvel Universe. The Mad Thinker, he's mad and he thinks, and that is all we got. So that is a flaw in any story with him, I think. That also, and if you can project your mind into things, there's got to be a better application than projecting your mind into these droids who kind of have like one ability, like project your mind into like, I don't know, like Reed. And take or something like that, or superior Spider-Man, somebody take over like Ultron, if you can get into these things. I don't know.
He's committing crimes from prison. Will, that's the perfect alibi. You can't catch a guy who's in prison already.
I do like that.
I feel like the lack of backstory on this character, like I've always felt like he'd almost be better just being a robot. Like in my mind, when I read this story, I think this should probably be a living brain story. Because we're already projecting this guy's brain into a robot, and it's all about calculation. I don't think Living Brain has quite the kind of like his reputation has been built up over the past years by Dan Slott. But like this reads to me like a Living Brain story. It's a robot that's trying to read Spider-Man in some way, and you're right, the lack of backstory behind the Mad Thinker. He might as well be a robot already. And so there's already that disconnect that he is like living in another body. So this story feels very like weirdly observational to me. And I just can't get caught up in it very much because there's no stakes for the bad guy. He's just kind of like sending a drone at Spider-Man. And that works in the story with like the Spider Slayers because Jonah is an active member of Spider-Man's supporting cast. In a way that Mad Thinker, again, like I said, he never returns with this information. And so it just feels, to me, it's like, okay, that's just kind of a throwaway story. I enjoy it, but it's nothing I really think about in the same way as I do the Stilt-man story or something like that.
See, I gotta say right here, I mean, all kidding aside, like I know, like you all started this by saying the Fool Killer story is the big miss of this run. Like to me, this is the big miss of this run. Like I don't quite get what Mad Thinker's doing here. It like you said, like things get introduced that then get promptly dropped. I don't, to me, like this is like when I'm binging on the Stern run, I this tends to be the issue. I kind of just speed through because I'm like, it doesn't do it for me. Like this doesn't scratch an itch, and that's all.
I see something that could improve it for me is if after Mad Thinker figures out that Spidey has a spider sense and his android is defeated, we see what his next science project is, you know? And now to find out, what does Iron Man eat for lunch? And then he like sits down. Like, then I'd be a little more hooked.
3 martinis.
Yeah, this story, I mean, it's Spider-Man versus a robot is never that interesting. So as a story, it's not that great. I think the Mad Thinker is a more interesting character to me than Stilt-Man or Fool Killer. The story is not as good as Stilt-Man.
Say it.
And honestly, I'd rather read the Mad Thinker story than read the word fool 45 times in one story. He just didn't say fool so much. I can get by the costume. I can get by everything else about it. It's just the word fool. I've said it so much in this podcast, it's driving me nuts.
Neither the Fool Killer or the Mad Thinker has anywhere close the emotional depth of Stilt-Man. Stilt-Man and his ongoing resentment is, I relate to him more and more the more we talk about it.
Do we want to
Might have to put him to number 1 over Juggernaut.
I think we're going to see Will in stilts that are of increasing height over the next few weeks. All right, so Stilt-Man and not Stilt-Man, Mad Thinker. What do we think about this character? Where does he fall on the list for everybody?
I go Juggernaut, Stilt-Man, Cobra and Hyde, Fool Killer, Mad Thinker, and Android. That's how I do it. Although those last 2 are pretty close.
Like that much.
I'm slotting Mad Thinker in just above Fool Killer.
Poor Fool Killer.
Sadly underneath Stilt-Man. Though I think the Mad Thinker could have beaten him with a better story.
And I'm gonna go Juggernaut, Stilt-Man, Hyde, Fool Killer, Cobra, Mad Thinker, Android.
And I'm siding with Will again. I actually, Mark, I'm giving you some points here. I'm putting Mad Thinker below Fool Killer. So we'll have a little parade for you later. But let's end it with our final other people's villain. That is Thunderball. Amazing Spider-Man 247 to 248. The story often forgotten because
it's like
happens to be paired with the kid who collects Spider-Man.
I was going to say, is Thunderball what killed the kid who collects? Because I always forget that he's in this comic.
This would be like if Mind of the Married Man was played before the Sopranos pilot on HBO or something like that.
John from Cincinnati. No, sorry.
Yeah, there you go. So the first appearance of Thunderball was in Defenders number 17. He's kind of primarily an Avengers villain, although he bounces around places. He had a different name. He was the Wrecker and part of the Wrecking Crew. For a while, he was known as the Black Bruce Banner, which anytime you're calling somebody the Black something,
it's like, stop.
I think you're leaning into trouble. You're leaning into trouble, or maybe falling into trouble. But his whole thing was that he got some credit because he was able to invent a miniature gamma ray bomb, which great. I don't know what the practical use of that is, but fair. On top of that, he has a magical crowbar. Which, if you didn't know, it's kind of like Captain Planet. When held aloft with the members of the Wrecking Crew, he can trigger lightning to strike, which gives them all their powers.
It's technically the Wrecker's crowbar, I believe. And
he's not the Wrecker?
He was the Wrecker at the time.
Wait, he was the Wrecker? But there's another guy who's the Wrecker.
I think there's another guy who becomes the Wrecker, but he was the primary Wrecker.
Okay. I've never read the original stories. But there's a guy who carries the crowbar normally.
See, this is why I'm Team Absorbing Man, okay? So none of this confusion.
Right. So he would eventually take on the name Thunderball when he took on the Wrecking Ball as a weapon. So he updated from the crowbar to to Thunderball. Although in this story, he has both. So he's a double threat. He's got his magic crowbar and he's got his Wrecking Ball, so he's doubly powered. And just to shortcut the story, this is a big fight story between characters. Spidey eventually steals the crowbar, and there's a fight that ensues, although he still has the power of the crowbar. And Spider-Man wins with his intellect by connecting a circuit from an electrical transformer and exploding Thunderball and depowering him for a moment. And my kind of quick summary of this feels like a rehash of Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. It's like kind of Stern dipping back into that well of the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. How does Spider-Man defeat somebody who vastly outpowers him? There's some fun stuff. I think are they on Staten Island in this story, or is it Long Island?
Long Island, I think.
I think it's Long Island. Mark, you're probably like screaming at me about this.
I mean, it's Long Island, but Long Island is, I mean, I live on Long Island, but I live in a town on Long Island. And, you know, so it always bothers me when people are like, Long Island, like, it's not a city. It's not it's just a massive land mass with many municipalities on it. But anyway, I digress.
Anyway, so yeah, that's Thunderball. I think Spider-Man has fought him a few times over the years, but this is kind of his big brouhaha with him in one issue. What'd you guys think of the Thunderball issue? Is it, as I said, just merely a rehash of Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut?
I think you're right, but it's still pretty fun. Like it's a short, clean fight. The art is really good in this, I think. There's something really compelling about the art. It's sort of clean and sharp. I mean, I've enjoyed the art in all of these issues, but this one stood out to me. It's kind of like nothing special, but a good little battle. It's also short. You know, we've the second issue. I don't know. I think it's okay, forgettable but fine, serviceable might be what I would say it as. It not like Mad Thinker, which was kind of a dud. This is like a good car chase. I've seen a million car chases, but a good car chase is still all right.
I mean, if the complaint is just that he's fighting someone that overpowers him, it's like, good. I don't want to watch Spider-Man constantly fight guys that he is way more powerful than. He should be usually fighting people that are so that he doesn't need to have a cold or a broken leg every time he fights somebody. It's nice that he can fight somebody that is outpowers him. I think Thunderball looks cool.
Yeah.
I like the Wrecking Crew in general. I think they just, despite the fact that they're fighting with crowbars and balls and chains, like they look cool. They have nice visual elements. It doesn't play into the story, but I like the idea that also that this is like the smart guy from the Wrecking Crew. Like the Wrecking Crew are a bunch of thugs, and for some reason there's like one scientist in the group. That's very interesting to me. I haven't read enough of their stories to see how well that gets played up, but I like his visual. I like that Spider-Man has to figure out, oh, this, the crowbar is the source of his power. I'll take it away. And it's like, man, it doesn't matter if I'm holding it. If it's near him, he still has his power. I also like that Spider-Man sort of stumbles on this guy. He's not looking for this guy, right? In this story, he is trying to catch the Hobgoblin.
Yeah.
And while trying to track the Hobgoblin, he stumbles onto a super strong other guy. He's like, oh man, I didn't need to get involved in this at all. I didn't even know. I wish I was ignorant of this fight, but now I gotta fight him. I think that's always fun too. There's something cool there. It's bad for both of them. They'd both be happier if this storyline had not happened.
Now, is Thunderball...
So I dig it. I dig it.
Now, is Thunderball another one of the characters that was part of Zemo's crew for Under Siege? I'm trying to remember.
I think the whole Wrecking Crew was.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know some of the others from Wrecking Crew. I didn't know if he was left out for some reason. But yeah.
Before Mark and Dan give their take on this, who can name, without looking it up, all members of the Wrecking Crew?
Oh, God.
There's 4.
I'm going to say...
maybe.
There's the Wrecker. There's...
What rep?
Thunderball, the Absorbing Man.
Nope. Absorbing Man's not one of them.
He's not a Wrecking Crew? Oh, I'm sorry.
No. He just hangs out with him because he also has a ball and chain during Secret Wars.
My bad.
There's Pile Driver, right?
Oh.
That's correct. And there's one more. You got Pile Driver, Thunderball, Wrecker, and...
there's the guy with like the metal head.
Oh, man.
He's named after a construction vehicle.
Yeah.
Is it Dozer?
That's a little bit
Bulldozer?
longer than
Is
that.
it Bulldozer?
It's Bulldozer.
Oh,
there you
man.
go.
Bulldozer, Pile Driver, Thunderball, and Wrecker. Now, which one is which Beetle? I see Wrecker as being a Paul, Thunderball is John.
I mostly know that because we reread Secret Wars so recently. Otherwise,
yeah, and the Wrecking Crew are in there.
Yeah, they're like a big part of that story. They're like the muscle. For
they're like Dr. Doom is the most important, followed closely by the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah. They get a lot of screen time in that story.
It's like we kill Kang in the first issue, but the Wrecking Crew, they're in it like all the way.
Mark, what do you think about this story, Thunderball?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It feels like a rehash. I mean, like, I also feel like, I mean, like, and this is kind of an unfair judgment, but I mean, we joked about this earlier, but like, it's very hard to give this story its proper analysis, when the fact of the matter is, when you read this issue, you're not reading for for the story, for the Thunderball story. You read it for the kid who collects. Like, it's like, I mean, like, to this day, I mean, I've read this story, I would say, you know, less than 5 times. I've read the kid who collects like 24 times in my lifetime, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or probably more. So it's like when you kind of get stacked up against literally one of the greatest not just the greatest Spider-Man story, one of the greatest comic book stories of all time, that so happens to be co-opted in this other story. I you know, it's kind of hard to like look at this in a meaningful way. It just feels like, you know, like just kind of filler to get to the main event. I know, of course, Kid Who Collects This was supposed to be the B story. But that's just not how history has presented it. So, like, to me, like, it's not a miss because I don't think it's poorly done, but it's easy to forget this story given where it kind of falls historically in it.
Yeah, I think that is a tough thing, though, to say it's not as good as the Kid Who Collects is a reason it's bad.
No, I know. Well, no, I don't think it's bad, but it's just like,
sure.
you know, it's like, I don't know, like, it's like, oh,
I think.
I don't know. Yeah, you go.
I also like it just as sort of like a rest between Hobgoblin issues. Like if the best parts of Stern's run are all Hobgoblin stories, and you took these out and just went from Hobgoblin story to Hobgoblin story, that arc is not as good. You get bored of it. There's something fun about like while he's waiting for the next Hobgoblin thing to happen, Spider-Man has to deal with this guy. It's what's missing from modern comics because they're all sort of like building up to the next event and then huge story, build up to the next huge story. That like old comics in the 80s had these sort of like 2 or 3 issues that are just sort of cases, like just you know, a villain of the week type stuff. And they don't need to be the best story ever to still be good and readable and fun and sort of necessary for the pacing of like the year of comics or whatever. And I think this serves that purpose really well. It is unfortunate that it's paired with a classic, one of the top 2 or 3 Spider-Man stories ever. That's a rough place for any story to be. Like any of these others, except for maybe the Juggernaut story, would pale next to this. Even your guy's precious Stilt-Man story, if it was followed up with the B story being Kid Who Collects,
I disagree.
you'd forget Stilt-Man.
If Stilt-Man was in this issue, nobody would even remember the Kid Who Collects. The pathos of Stilt-Man, you know, this whiny kid. We'd never remember him.
The Kid Who Collects Stilt-Man.
I think, Kevin, you're really right about this, especially in terms of like the pacing of modern comics and how this would, you know, fit in. Like the joy of this one is it's a little more of a classic story. It reminds me almost of like the second issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which it became kind of the template, which is Spider-Man fights the guy, fails, and then comes back and has to outsmart him in some way. And in this case, it's using science to, you know, create this, circuit. I don't know why I was tripping over saying that. Which in my mind, like as much as I love Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut, I think the circuit is kind of more clever than burying him in concrete in some way.
He kind of looks into that too.
What?
The concrete, right? Doesn't he luck into the concrete? It's not like he had that plan. I mean, that's a better story. I'm not gonna.
yeah, absolutely. I think the Juggernaut's a better story, and but I like that about this is it does lean into that science element of Peter Parker, and I like whereas the Juggernaut is kind of isolated. He's on this construction site, and there's not other people around. This one kind of interacts with like the highway and passersby that are getting caught up in this battle with Spider-Man, and I think that's kind of neat when you bring in. Bystanders and stuff. It is a like by the numbers Spider-Man story, but with great art and like you said, for the pacing of the run, I think it's good. So I whenever I reread this, I'm surprised at how much I like it more than my memory allows me to remember it. Like it like Mark said, it's paired up with something that makes it completely forgettable in comparison. But it is a solid story in its own right, and I enjoy it for that.
In the same realm of being other people's villains, like what I enjoy about all of these is Spider-Man having to like figure out their deal. Like that was the fun of those old Ditko issues too, right? It's like, oh, what's the Vulture's? How does the Vulture fly? I got to figure that out. That's how I'll defeat him. Like, what's Doc Ock's thing? I got to figure out how to defeat him. Like you lose that when you fight those guys for the 10th and 12th and 15th time. And you can regain that here. He's like, okay, what this crowbar is important, or the Juggernaut. Oh, I'll just jump on his back and cover his eyes. That'll stop him. Nope, didn't work. Okay, what's next? That's the fun of these stories. When he grabs Cobra and Cobra slithers out of his hands. He's like, oh, okay, that won't work. I got to figure something else out. Or Stilt-man stands up, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I like watching Spider-Man
Heroically stands up.
I like watching Spider-Man have to
With
figure
pathos.
figure out what these guys' deal is. Like that's the fun of this. For me, as part of the fun of him fighting these other villains.
Shout out to the old amazing Spider Talk episode where you guys interviewed Ron Friends. If you are a fan of Kid Who Collects, it's an essential listen. I say. I love that interview.
I like that Mark wasn't on that one. That's what really, it really.
I was
something that just
recovering
worked.
from my vaccine. Okay.
Sure.
The interview was really great. Ron Friends was so friendly and nice and had great recall of his decisions to draw certain things. I really loved that interview. So thanks for doing it, guys.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
Even you, Mark, thanks for letting it happen and not coming on and saying that Kid Who Collects Spider-Man is not as good as Fool Killer and therefore you shouldn't cover it.
I was too busy watching Kyle McCallahan on Twin Peaks.
And that's the kind of commentary that would have ruined that interview. So thanks for being ill, Mark. I can't thank you enough. Okay, guys, the time has come. People have been eagerly awaiting this thing we invented mid-show. Our rankings of these villains. So let's go through our typical order here, which is Will, Kevin, Mark, and me. Will, get us started.
Stilt-man at the top. No, I'm only kidding. Juggernaut at the top. Stilt-man holds at number 2. Then I'll put Thunderball just for the enjoyable story. Then I'm going to put Cobra and Hyde for the cool visuals. Then I'm going to put Fool Killer because he's got style, even though he's insane. And Mad Thinker and the Android bringing up the rear, the caboose of my list. I got everybody, right?
You got everybody. Kevin?
Kid Who Collects Spider-Man as a villain really low because he just doesn't pose any threat. No comment on the quality of the story.
Yeah.
Whose other people's villain is that? Is he a reoccurring
Cancer. It's
Avengers
Cancer's
threat?
villain.
Cancer's the villain.
Cancer's villain.
Spider-Man defeats him easily. I'm Juggernaut's number 1. Hyde and Cobra for me are number 2. I think Thunderball's my number 3. Then Stilt-man, Mad Thinker, and ending up with Fool Killer. That's where I'm at. And then Cancer.
All right. Well,
I'm sorry that I started the joke of being silly about that. I apologize.
I'm ready to blow everybody's minds. No. Juggernaut, Stilt-man, Hyde, Fool Killer, Thunderball / Cobra, Mad Thinker,
Okay.
and then Cancer.
I could see it. I could see it.
Hey,
You put a big
Will and
defense
Kevin,
for Fool Killer.
Will and Kevin, what are your Sunday nights looking like? Because I feel like I'm going to be missing a podcasting partner after this. No, I respect that, Mark, even if I vastly disagree with you. But I am going to be completely in concert here with Will and his choices again. It is going for me. Juggernaut, Stilt-man, Thunderball, Cobra and Mr. Hyde, then Fool Killer, and then Mad Thinker is my final list. So
You guys really enjoyed that recap of Stilt-man's exploits versus Daredevil and
he's
Spider-Man.
great. And some listener at home can tabulate the points there and get back to us on who won what, and we'll promptly ignore it and move on. But so I think this has been a fun discussion. Overall, I think these are fun issues, not like the highlight of Stern's run, but I do think it's a kind of nice little spice tossed in there, give us something new. And I dare say they work. Rest in peace, Denny O'Neil. They do work better than all of the villains Denny O'Neil brought in during his run, even if they aren't Spidey's primary foes. I feel bad getting a Denny O'Neil dig in there.
Did Denny O'Neil do The Ringer, or was that Roger Stern?
That is also Roger Stern.
I liked The Ringer. I put Ringer high in my list.
Yeah, The Ringer is great.
That might have just been John Byrne's art elevating that story. It looked cool.
It's a cool story. I'm gonna back it. Well, you know, to that point, to the point of backing it, if you find this show entertaining and valuable, please consider supporting us. Recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend, and if you're able, become a member on the Patreon.
Yeah, we can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. We are constantly making exclusive content for our members. This week, Patreon members will hear Dan and my review of Amazing Spider-Man number 70. That's right. I'm not sick with COVID vaccine. I'm here to review Amazing Spider-Man number 70 with you, Dan.
And we're talking the start of Sinister War in that issue, or I guess the prelude to it. Everything is either a prelude or, a postscript to these stories. These
Alpha
days.
or Omega.
Yeah, there's nothing else. You're either a story or you're the before and after of a story. So why not take that $3.99, the price of a new comic, and put it towards a month subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content. That way you'll hear our Patreon exclusive review podcast on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week it comes out, instead of waiting for it to arrive in our public podcast feed.
Yeah, if you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. This season, we'll be mailing out a print of Spider-Man fighting Dr. Octopus as his friends look on, drawn by official Marvel artist Federico Vincentini in color and inks. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
And I'll tell you, I'm literally sending out the Federico Vincentini print this week. I've already sent out half of them. Now, the next one that we're going to be doing is a Ron Friends print, a missing page of Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, where Ron has drawn basically page 7B of that story, where the Kid and Spidey look through Tim's collection of comics and have a good laugh about it. It's a really special commission that I think our members are going to really enjoy. You'll have your own page of Kid Who Collects that nobody else has seen. It's kind of apocryphal, but Ron agreed to do it, so we're going with it. Yeah, that's going to be really exciting. But we do know that this is a hard time for everybody, as it is for us too, so we appreciate anyone who supports the show just by listening and sharing. But if you do have the means, please join our Patreon to support the continued existence of our show. Just follow the link in the description. And again, a thank you to all the members who already make this show possible.
But alas, Dan, it's that time. It's time for me to be in the minority of an opinion for the first time on this show, because we have 3 other people who drown me out. It's okay. No. It's also time for us to say goodbye to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Well, thank you again to Kevin and Will Hines for coming on the show, guys. It was really fun to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So what a treat. Oh my goodness.
Yes, we're very honored and excited, but thank you for asking.
Well, so tell us again where we can listen to your podcast, a little bit about it, get people to jump up. I will say before you do so, I don't listen to any comics podcast really, but I listen to your podcast.
Thank
and
you. Wow.
You guys are very self-effacing. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, we're not really a serious comics podcast. And I won't agree with that entirely, but what I enjoy about your show is you guys have a great banter between the two of you, and you make it fun to listen. Even if I've exhausted the conversation on Superior Spider-Man in my own thing, it's been fun to revisit that and also see it from a more comical lens. And that's what I love about your show. And so I would encourage people to listen to it, but enough, don't take my word for it. What do you guys have to say about your show?
Thank you so much. It's an incredibly sweet endorsement. So thank you. Our podcast is Screw It. We're just going to talk about comics. Kevin and I are actual brothers, sort of comedians, and we talk about comics that we mostly have loved our whole lives, although now we're getting into maybe newer stuff that one or both of us haven't read so much, but we just apply our brother friendship to analyze the comic. And right now we're doing Superior Spider-Man, and we're also doing a lot of early Claremont mutant stories, because a big blind spot in me and Kevin's reading histories, we had never read the early Claremont X-Men, which we feel dumb about. So we're making our amends, reading them, and of course, we are completely blown away by how great those stories are. So, I mean, we're idiots. It's like, oh, that's Star Wars is a fun movie, but so if you want to hear us be amazed by early Claremont X-Men, or hear us be thrilled by the superior Spider-Man, check it out.
Yeah, we've had hot takes like Batman Year One is good, and that the original Spider-Man run is a classic. Those are sort of the hot takes we come in with.
Wow.
We do have hot takes. Kevin has hot takes. Kevin gets hot
Sure,
takes.
sure. I don't know about that.
Not like
But,
Mark hot takes, but they're at least warm hot takes. He's not like Mark, where he's saying the Chameleon is the greatest villain in Spider-Man history or something like that.
Oh my goodness!
He is the first villain in Spider-Man history. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
We have the benefit of the covering what we want to cover, so we generally are covering stuff we like. So it's a very positive podcast. It's a very silly podcast. We kind of love stuff, warts and all. Like even when we're covering bad
the weird issues of
FF. Yeah, it's fun and bad at the same time, and we can see both sides of that. So we hope that comes across in our podcast. We're going to be doing Dark Knight Returns in the near future, right, Will?
Yeah, oh god, I'm so excited. I mean, just one of the absolute best superhero stories of all time, and something that Kevin and I were thrilled to read as it came out, and every single time we've reread it since. I can't wait to go over Dark Knight Returns.
And we'll probably be doing a season of guests. Our season for us is like 6 episodes or whatever.
Yeah.
So we'll see when that comes out.
We do have some incredible guests coming up for that season, so we'd love to have you guys on if you guys ever have time, Dan and Mark. So we're gonna have
Try
some
to
great
schedule
people.
it. We'll schedule it around your vaccine schedule.
I was going to say,
Yeah, that sounds like a great time. I mean, look, there's no better book to be silly about than The Dark Knight Returns.
Honestly, yeah, it's a great book, but it's also
outrageous.
weird. It's weird.
outrageous.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
you could talk about The Dark Knight Returns, or you can come on and defend the Fool Killer. I tell you, what's your best way to spend an hour and change of your time? Okay, that's all I gotta say.
I mean, no one else is doing that fool killer argument. There's a lot of people who are talking about how good Dark Knight Returns is. So you are doing a job that has not yet been done.
Say, this is why people tune in, right?
We could be getting thousands of downloads for reviewing Black Widow, but no, we're giving you that food killer content that you're dying to get. Well, thanks again, guys, for coming on. I've wanted to have you guys on for a while, and I'm glad we could make it happen. And I hope we can do this again soon. Maybe you'll have to come back for the next Bad Guys episode, and we'll keep this list growing and see how
Stilt-man
low
will
the
stay at
go.
number 2.
Yeah,
Oh,
there
my
you go.
goodness.
Stilt-man, always number 2.
It'll-
All right. Well, well, thanks again, everybody. And this episode, as always, was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friends, Sal Buscema, Ray Sumser, and Nick Cagnetti. And our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack and Spider Madge. Plus, our introduction animation and musical stinger comes from Josh Sutton from the YouTube show Panels to Pixels.
This was a lot of fun, Dan. But what do we got coming up the next time around? We are on this show that we call Amazing Spider Talk.
Well, Mark, we kind of teased it already. We're going to be covering your favorite Spider-Man story, and Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. But really, we're going to be talking about how that story created a new kind of story type for Spider-Man stories going forward. That kind of unbeatable foe, or that incredibly overpowered enemy for Spider-Man to fight. We're going to be talking about the stories that exist in that realm and how this kind of became a staple of the genre or the character of Spider-Man. The unbeatable foe where Spider-Man somehow becomes the victor in some way or other. Mark, I'm excited to get into this with you as we grow our list of stories to talk about.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, especially when we talk about him overcoming the odds and taking down that pirate character. So we're going
Absolutely. Just a lot of pirate characters.
Arr.
So if you're tuning in live, don't forget, as soon as the show ends, the conversation continues with our audience on YouTube. And if you missed out on Amazing Spider Talk Live this time, we'll be back soon on YouTube. So go there and subscribe and click on the bell to stay on top of all the new live recordings that we'll be doing in the future. But as always, this will remain a podcast first and foremost. That will always remain consistent, just like how we end the show. And that's with our motto. So, Mark, until you start slithering around in your basement in a leotard, what's our motto?
That motto, of course, is, with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk. You fool.
Don't miss the next installment.